Hello everybody, my name is Derry and welcome back to Learning HTML with me. So we're back to talking about HTML tables. As we said last class, this is part 2 of learning HTML tables and this is also the finale. So let's get started. So here are the main key points from last class. I'm not going to touch on all of them, but you can read them for yourselves. One of the really important ones is that we learned that tables are organized into rows, columns, and cells. Of course, the key one being that a table isn't a type of arrangement of data. We also learned that HTML tables are just specifically used for displaying data through tables in a web browser. And we also learned how tables are widely used in communication, research, and data analysis. So the first thing we need to learn when we're writing about tables is the table tag. We use the table tag to define a table within HTML, as you might have guessed. The basic elements that make up the table tag include the th tag, the td tag, and the tr tag. The table tag is actually just a block element. So we haven't discussed block elements in any of our previous classes. So what is a block element? A block element is any type of element that starts a new line and uses the full width of the page by default. A block element can take up one line or multiple lines and has a line break before and after the element. So an inline element is the exact opposite of a block element. An inline element is an element that is able to have multiple elements on the same line by default. Now, these two concepts are pretty hard to understand off of just text, so we have an example. In this case, the different colors represent the different elements. Now, I've only filled up 2 of the colors because I just put in elements we were familiar with. In this case, we have the H1 and the P tags. For inline elements, I use the EM tag. The EM tag is used for applying emphasis, if you didn't know, and yeah. So from this info, we can gather how each color, or each element, because that's what it's referring to, takes up the full line on its own. For the inline elements, we can see how multiple elements are able to fit on the same line without making a new line. Of course, it'll eventually have to create a new line by force if the original line gets filled up. So the first tag, once again, is the tr tag. We use the tr tag to define a table row within HTML. In the picture to the right, our table has 3 rows. In this case, the subheadings would be pointy, flat, and wet, and then our data is under it. If we look to the HTML code itself, we can also see this happening here. We have the tr opening and closing 3 times, and it appears 3 times in between the table tag itself. So the next statement the next tag is the th tag. We use the th tag to define a table header within HTML. Once again, in the picture to the right, we have our headings pointy, flat, and wet. Once again, we look to our code and we can see it happening there as well. In between the first table row, we have the th tag being used, and then in between it is the pointy, flat, and wet subheadings. Of course, these subheadings could be whatever you want it to be. So the last one is the td tag. Now we use the td tag to define a table cell, basically meaning table data. Once again, if we look to the picture to the right, we can see that our data would be the mountains, the plains, the rivers, and then everything else that's under it. We look to our code and we can see it happening there again with the td tag. So we can notice how everything points together, and we can also notice how everything is used in rows. So if we look at the second row, which has mountains, plains, and rivers, we can look to our code and we can see the second time that the tr tag opens and closes. In between that, we have the td tag opening and closing for each data or piece of data or piece of a table cell. So here we have another example. We have HTML code and then we have the expected web browser output. If we look to our code, once again, it's pretty easy to analyze. We have the table tag, of course, wrapping around everything because that's what makes it the block element. So the tables It's basically like the table's flesh or the table's body. Then we have the insides. We have our 3 rows appearing here. So we have the tr tag opening and closing 3 times. And then if we look to our expected web browser output, we can see that happening there as well. So yeah. But here's our actual output if we were to do this in our own text editor. As you can see, what makes this a lot different from the first example is that we are missing the borders that pretty much separate everything together so it doesn't look like one word or words combined. Like for example here, we have Michelle and purple being combined together. These are actually the same table data collected, it's just once again displayed differently. So yeah, we can kind of understand why we want our table to look more like the expected web browser output, what we imagine in our heads, rather than this. This is a lot more complicated for the viewer to understand. So the thing about this is that we did not specify a border for the table, so it displayed without borders. So now you're wondering how we can display borders with our table. To do this, we would use the style tag. Now the style tag is leading into CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and we have a whole class dedicated to it coming up. So we use the style tag to define style information for specific elements within our HTML code. The style element must always be inside the head tag of the document. Once again, we'll be going into depth with CSS and the style tag in the next class. So here we have an example of using the style tag. This class, since we're talking mainly about tables, I don't fully plan to explain how we are going to use the style tag and the code behind it. Right now we're just going to be putting it in our work so we can have our table displayed with borders, because this isn't too much related to tables. So we have an example of the style tag being used just for a quick simple understanding. In this case, the style tag is giving style information to the P element, and it's telling the P color to be red. So the P element or the P tag text is going to be red. So when you're making your own table, or you're trying to, since we haven't discussed the CSS, or since we haven't discussed CSS or the style tags yet, please just put this code into your CSS folder or into your head tags. Once again, we'll be discussing CSS next class. So now we've put it on our Word and we have our web browser output. Of course, this looks different on different web browsers, but with the one I'm using, this is what our web browser output looks like. As you can see, it at least looks a little bit better, and now everything's more organized. Okay, that's all for this class, and I hope you guys learn a bit more about tables and have a good understanding. Next class, we'll be talking about CSS and what really goes behind it. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you guys have a great day.